Captain Sarah Phoenix Mitchell adjusted her flight helmet as she walked across the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete, creating shimmering waves of heat that made the distant mountains look like a mirage. At 28 years old, Sarah had already broken more barriers than most pilots would in their entire careers. She was the youngest woman to ever qualify for the F-22 Raptor program, and her skills in the cockpit had earned her a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. The morning briefing had been routine until Admiral James Harrison entered the room. Harrison was old-school military, the kind of man who believed that certain positions were meant for certain people. His weathered face showed decades of service, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had never quite accepted the changing face of the modern military. When he spotted Sarah among the pilots, his expression hardened. Sarah had heard the whispers about Harrison before. He was known for his traditional views and had been vocal about his concerns regarding women in combat roles. Several female pilots had requested transfers from bases under his command, citing an uncomfortable work environment. Sarah, however, had never been one to back down from a challenge. The briefing covered a standard training exercise involving multiple aircraft and coordination with ground forces. Sarah listened intently, taking notes and mentally preparing for the mission ahead. Her F-22, designated Phoenix Rising, was one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, and she had spent countless hours mastering its capabilities. As the other pilots filed out of the briefing room, Admiral Harrison called out, "Captain Mitchell, a word." His voice carried the authority of decades in command. But there was something else there, too. A challenge. Sarah approached the Admiral's position at the front of the room. Up close, she could see the numerous ribbons and decorations on his uniform, evidence of a distinguished career. But she also noticed the way his jaw was set, the slight narrowing of his eyes that suggested this conversation would be anything but routine. "Captain," Harrison began, his voice measured but cold, "I've been reviewing the pilot assignments for today's exercise. I think it would be best if you sat this one out." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been preparing for this mission for weeks, studying the tactical scenarios and coordinating with her wingmen. Her record was spotless, her performance ratings consistently excellent. There was no logical reason for her to be grounded. "Sir, may I ask why?" Sarah kept her voice steady, professional. Years of military training had taught her to maintain composure even when facing unreasonable orders. Harrison's expression didn't change. "I have concerns about your ability to handle the pressure of this particular exercise. The scenarios we're running today require a certain level of experience that I'm not confident you possess." The implication was clear, even if unspoken. This wasn't about her experience. Sarah had more flight hours in the F-22 than several of the male pilots who would be flying today. This was about her gender, about Harrison's belief that she didn't belong in that cockpit. Other pilots had gathered near the doorway, ostensibly checking their gear but clearly listening to the exchange. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to what amounted to a public humiliation. "Admiral, with respect, I've successfully completed every training exercise I've been assigned to. My performance evaluations speak for themselves." Sarah's voice carried a quiet strength that had been forged through years of proving herself in a male-dominated field. Harrison stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent the nearby pilots from hearing. "Captain, I'm giving you a direct order. You will not be flying today. Consider it a learning opportunity to observe from the ground." The dismissal was complete. In front of her peers, Sarah had been ordered to stand down without cause. The Admiral's message was clear. He didn't believe she belonged among the elite pilots of the F-22 program. Sarah came to attention and saluted crisply. "Yes, sir." The words tasted bitter, but she wouldn't give Harrison the satisfaction of seeing her break protocol. As Harrison left the briefing room, the other pilots began to disperse. Some avoided eye contact with Sarah, uncomfortable witnesses to what had just transpired. Others offered sympathetic glances, but no one spoke up. The military hierarchy was clear, and challenging an admiral's orders was not done lightly. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Viper Rodriguez, Sarah's usual wingman, approached her as she gathered her materials. Mike was a veteran pilot who had flown with Sarah numerous times and knew her capabilities better than most. "Phoenix, that was," Mike started, then stopped, struggling to find the right words. "Unfair? Discriminatory? Wrong?" Sarah supplied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "All of the above," Mike agreed. "You're one of the best pilots I've ever flown with. Harrison's making a mistake." All. Sarah appreciated Mike's support, but it didn't change her situation. She would spend the day watching from the ground, while less qualified pilots took to the skies. The injustice of it burned, but she had learned long ago that the military wasn't always fair. Sometimes, you had to play the long game. As Sarah walked to the observation tower where she would monitor the exercise, she passed her F-22. The sleek fighter sat on the tarmac like a caged predator, its angular surfaces and advanced systems representing the pinnacle of aviation technology. Running her hand along the fuselage, Sarah whispered, "Not today, old friend. But soon." Unreported. Not today. Unreported. The exercise began without incident. Sarah watched from the control tower as 12 F-22 seconds took off in formation, their engines creating thunder that echoed across the base. She knew she should be up there, knew that her skills and training had earned her that right. Instead, she was relegated to observer status because of one man's prejudices. Admiral Harrison stood at the opposite end of the control tower, occasionally glancing in Sarah's direction with what seemed like satisfaction. He had made his point, established his authority, and put the young female pilot in what he considered her proper place. The training exercise was complex, involving air-to-air combat scenarios, ground support missions, and coordination with electronic warfare systems. Sarah followed every move, analyzing tactics and noting areas where she might have performed differently. Even grounded, she was learning and preparing for the next opportunity. 2 hours into the exercise, something went wrong. One of the F-22 seconds, call sign Hammer, reported mechanical difficulties. The pilot, Captain James Bulldog Stevens, was experiencing engine troubles and loss of hydraulic pressure. His aircraft was losing altitude and becoming increasingly difficult to control. Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her pilot instincts fully engaged. She could hear the tension in Stevens' voice over the radio as he reported his status. The ground control team was working frantically to guide him through emergency procedures, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Hammer, this is Control," the tower operator called. "We're showing multiple system failures on your aircraft. Recommend immediate emergency landing procedure." Stevens' response crackled through the speakers. "Control. I'm losing control authority. The stick feels like it's fighting me. I don't think I can make it back to the runway." Admiral Harrison had moved closer to the radio console, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine concern. A pilot in distress was a pilot in distress, regardless of any personal opinions or politics. Lives were on the line. Sarah found herself analyzing the situation from her position in the tower. Stevens was flying at 12,000 feet, approximately 15 miles northeast of the base. Based on his reported problems and the weather conditions, she could see several potential solutions that might not be obvious from the ground control perspective. The radio chatter continued as various controllers offered suggestions to the troubled pilot. Stevens tried each recommended procedure, but his situation continued to worsen. His F-22 was becoming increasingly unstable, and the risk of complete system failure was growing by the minute. "Control. I'm going to have to consider ejection," Stevens finally transmitted, his voice tight with stress. "This bird is not responding to inputs." Ejecting from an F-22 at 12,000 feet was survivable, but it meant the loss of a $150 million aircraft. More importantly, ejection always carried risks, and there was no guarantee that Stevens would walk away uninjured. Sarah stood up from her chair, her mind racing through possibilities. She had studied emergency procedures extensively and had actually experienced a similar situation during her advanced training. There might be an alternative that the ground controllers hadn't considered. Admiral Harrison was now directly involved in the emergency response, speaking with senior controllers and monitoring Stevens's status. The exercise had been suspended, and all other aircraft were being directed to maintain safe distances from the troubled F-22. "Admiral," Sarah said, approaching Harrison's position despite knowing she was risking further discipline. "I might have a suggestion for Captain Stevens' situation." Harrison turned to face her, his expression a mixture of irritation and surprise. "Captain Mitchell, you're here as an observer only. This situation is being handled by qualified personnel. Sir, I understand that, but I've encountered a similar emergency scenario during training. There's a procedure that might not be in the standard emergency checklist that could help stabilize his aircraft." The Admiral's face reddened slightly. "Captain, I ordered you out of today's exercise because I questioned your readiness for high-pressure situations. The last thing we need is untested advice from someone who couldn't even earn a spot in today's mission." The words stung, but Sarah pressed on. In the background, Stevens's voice continued to report increasing problems with his aircraft. Time was running out, and personal conflicts seemed insignificant compared to a pilot's life. "Admiral, with all due respect, Captain Stevens is running out of options. The procedure I'm thinking of involves redistributing hydraulic pressure through the backup systems in a specific sequence. It's not standard protocol, but it worked when I faced similar circumstances." Harrison stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between his personal opinions and the desperate situation unfolding above them. The control room had gone quiet, except for the ongoing radio communication with Stevens, and everyone could sense the tension between the Admiral and the grounded pilot. Finally, Harrison spoke. "Captain Mitchell, you had your chance to prove yourself today, and I determined you weren't ready. I'm not about to risk a pilot's life based on suggestions from someone I've already deemed unfit for this mission. Stay in your observer role and let the qualified personnel handle this emergency." The dismissal was final and public. Sarah felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the control room, as she was essentially told that her input wasn't valued or wanted. The Admiral had not only grounded her from the mission but was now refusing to consider her expertise even in an emergency situation. As Sarah returned to her chair, she could hear Stevens's increasingly desperate radio calls. His F-22 was losing altitude more rapidly, and the standard emergency procedures weren't providing the stability he needed. The clock was ticking, and traditional solutions weren't working. She sat back down, her hands clenched in frustration. Somewhere above them, a fellow pilot was fighting for his life in a situation she might be able to help with. But Admiral Harrison's prejudices had effectively silenced her voice when it might matter most. The radio crackled again. "Control, I'm down to 8,000 feet and losing altitude fast. I don't think I have much choice left here." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had spent years proving herself, fighting for every opportunity, earning respect through skill and determination. Today, all of that seemed meaningless, in the face of one man's unwillingness to look beyond his preconceptions. But as Stevens' voice filled the control room again, growing more strained with each transmission, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant risking everything, including your career. Sarah stood up again, this time with a determination that radiated through the control room. Admiral Harrison was huddled with the senior flight controllers, their voices growing more urgent as Stevens' situation deteriorated. The F-22 was now at 6,000 feet and dropping, with multiple system failures cascading through the aircraft's complex electronics. "Control, I'm showing total hydraulic failure now." Stevens' voice crackled through the speakers, barely maintaining professional composure. "Flight controls are practically non-responsive. I need immediate guidance on emergency landing procedures, or I'm going to have to punch out." The senior controller, Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, was an 18-year veteran who had guided countless pilots through emergencies. But even her extensive experience wasn't providing solutions to Stevens's unique combination of system failures. She looked up at Admiral Harrison with concern etched across her face. "Sir, we're running out of conventional options. The standard emergency procedures aren't addressing his specific combination of failures. If he ejects at this altitude and speed, there's significant risk." Sarah could see the weight of command settling heavily on Harrison's shoulders. The Admiral might have personal biases, but he was ultimately responsible for every pilot under his command. The thought of losing Stevens was clearly affecting him, despite his earlier dismissive attitude toward her suggestions. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached the group again. This time, several other pilots and controllers had gathered around, all focused on finding a solution to save their colleague. The earlier exercise had been completely forgotten in the face of this real emergency. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice calm but insistent, "I need to tell you about the procedure I mentioned. During advanced training at Nellis, I experienced a cascading hydraulic failure almost identical to what Captain Stevens is reporting." Harrison started to turn away, but Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, maybe we should hear what Phoenix has to say. Stevens is running out of time and altitude." The Admiral's jaw tightened, clearly frustrated by what he saw as insubordination. But the desperate radio calls from above were impossible to ignore. Stevens was now at 4,000 feet, and still descending. "You have 30 seconds, Captain Mitchell," Harrison said coldly. "But understand that if your suggestion results in harm to Captain Stevens, you'll face a court-martial." Sarah nodded, knowing she was putting her entire career on the line. But Stevens' life was worth more than her career prospects. She stepped closer to the radio console, her voice clear and confident. "The key is to isolate the damaged hydraulic lines and redistribute pressure through the backup systems in a specific sequence. Instead of trying to restore full hydraulic pressure, we work with partial pressure in strategic systems. Captain Stevens needs to switch to manual override on the primary flight controls, while maintaining backup power to the stabilizer trim." Master Sergeant Williams looked up from her technical manual. "That's not in our standard emergency procedures, Captain." "I know," Sarah replied, "but it worked when I was in a similar situation." The aircraft manufacturer's engineers confirmed afterward that the procedure can work when multiple hydraulic systems fail simultaneously. Admiral Harrison studied Sarah intently, trying to read her confidence level. Above them, Stevens reported his altitude as 3,000 feet. Time was almost up. "Control, I'm preparing for ejection sequence," Stevens transmitted. "This aircraft is becoming uncontrollable." Harrison made his decision. "Sergeant Williams, relay Captain Mitchell's procedure to Captain Stevens." "But, Captain Mitchell," he added, fixing Sarah with a stern stare, "you better be right about this." Sarah felt her heart pounding as Williams began transmitting the modified emergency procedure to Stevens. Every word was critical. Every step had to be executed precisely. One mistake could make an already dangerous situation fatal. "Hammer, this is Control," Williams transmitted. "We're going to try a modified emergency procedure. Switch your hydraulic controls to manual override mode and isolate your primary hydraulic lines using the emergency cutoff switches." "Control, Roger." Switching to manual override, Stevens responded. His voice was steadier now that he had a new plan to try. Hydraulic cutoffs activated. The control room held its collective breath as they waited for Stevens to report the results. Sarah found herself gripping the edge of the console, knowing that her career and Stevens' life hung in the balance of the next few moments. "Control, I'm showing partial hydraulic pressure restoration," Stevens announced. "Flight controls are responding better. Still limited, but I have some authority back." A murmur of relief went through the control room. The procedure was working, at least partially, but Stevens was still in danger, flying a damaged aircraft with limited control capability. "Hammer, now adjust your stabilizer trim to +3 degrees and engage backup electrical power to your flight control computers." Sarah called out, stepping closer to the radio. Admiral Harrison shot her a sharp look. She was supposed to relay instructions through Williams, not communicate directly with the aircraft. But Williams nodded to her, understanding that Sarah's direct involvement might be critical to Stephen's survival. Roger, control. Stabilizer trim to +3, backup electrical engaged, Stevens confirmed. For several tense moments, there was silence except for the hum of electronic equipment in the control room. Then, Stevens's voice came through again, this time with genuine relief evident. Control, this is Hammer. I have significantly improved control authority. The aircraft is stabilizing. I think I can make it back to base for an emergency landing. The control room erupted in quiet cheers and sighs of relief. Stevens was going to make it. The modified procedure had worked, giving him enough control to safely bring his damaged F-22 home. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication wash over her. The procedure she had learned through her own emergency experience had quite possibly saved Stevens's life and preserved a valuable aircraft. But she also noticed Admiral Harrison's expression, which showed confusion and grudging, respect rather than satisfaction. Hammer, Roger. You're cleared for immediate emergency landing on runway 0-9. Emergency crews are standing by. Williams transmitted. As Stevens began his approach to the base, Admiral Harrison turned to face Sarah. The control room had returned to focused activity as everyone prepared for the emergency landing. But the tension between the Admiral and the grounded pilot remained. Captain Mitchell, Harrison said quietly, his voice lacking its earlier hostility. That was good thinking. Where exactly did you learn that procedure? During my advanced training at Nellis Air Force Base, sir. I experienced a similar emergency during a night training flight. The incident was thoroughly investigated, and the procedure was validated by both Air Force engineers and the aircraft manufacturer. Harrison studied her for a long moment. And this incident was part of your training record? Yes, sir. It should be in my file, along with the commendations I received for successfully handling the emergency. 1. The Admiral's expression shifted slightly, and Sarah could see him processing new information. It was becoming clear that he hadn't thoroughly reviewed her complete record before making his decision to ground her. His assumption about her experience level had been based on incomplete information. Control, Hammer is on final approach, Stevens announced. Aircraft is responding well to controls. Emergency landing should be routine. Through the control tower windows, they could see Stevens' F-22 approaching the runway. Emergency vehicles were positioned along the flight path, their red lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Despite the successful procedure, an emergency landing always carried risks. The aircraft touched down smoothly, Stevens executing a textbook landing despite his aircraft's damaged systems. As the F-22 rolled to a stop on the runway, the emergency crews swarmed around it, ensuring that any residual dangers were quickly addressed. Nice work, Hammer, Williams transmitted. Welcome home. Thanks, Control. And please pass my appreciation to whoever suggested that modified procedure. That pilot just saved my life and my aircraft. All eyes in the control room turned to Sarah, who felt a mixture of satisfaction and awkwardness at being the center of attention. She had proven her worth under pressure, but she was also aware that Admiral Harrison was still processing what had just happened. Captain Stevens, Harrison said, taking the radio microphone. This is Admiral Harrison. The modified procedure was suggested by Captain Mitchell, who is currently assigned as an observer for today's exercise. There was a moment of silence before Stevens responded. Admiral, please tell Captain Mitchell that I owe her a debt I can never repay. Her knowledge and quick thinking just brought me home to my family. The weight of those words settled over the control room. Sarah had not only demonstrated her technical knowledge and flying experience, but had also shown the kind of character that defined the best military pilots. The willingness to put others' safety ahead of personal considerations. Admiral Harrison set down the microphone and turned to face Sarah directly. The authority in his posture remained, but something had changed in his expression. The certainty that had characterized his earlier interactions with her had been replaced by something approaching uncertainty. Captain Mitchell, I need to ask you something directly, Harrison said, his voice more measured than before. In your opinion, Are you qualified to fly the F-22 inches combat situations? It was a loaded question, and Sarah knew her answer could determine not only her immediate future, but potentially her entire military career. She had already put everything on the line to help Stevens. Now, she had to decide how far she was willing to go to defend her own qualifications. Admiral, I am not only qualified to fly the F-22 inches combat situations. I am one of the most qualified pilots in this program. My training scores, flight hours, and emergency response record all support that assessment. What happened here today was not luck or a one-time success. It was the result of extensive training, experience, and dedication to excellence that I bring to every mission. The directness of her response seemed to surprise Harrison. He had expected either deference or anger, not the calm confidence that Sarah displayed. Around them, the control room continued its post-emergency activities, but several personnel were clearly listening to the exchange. And if I were to assign you to a combat mission tomorrow, you would be ready? Sir, I would be ready today. I've been ready since I completed my certification in this aircraft. What I lack is not readiness or capability, but opportunity. Today's emergency simply gave me a chance to demonstrate what many of my colleagues already know about my abilities. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with conflicting thoughts and emotions. His long-held beliefs were being challenged by the evidence of Sarah's competence. But changing such deeply held views was not easy for anyone, especially someone in his position. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez approached the group, having just returned from coordinating Stevens' post-flight medical check. Admiral, Captain Stevens is fine. His aircraft will need significant repairs, but it's salvageable. He specifically asked me to tell you that Captain Mitchell's procedure was executed perfectly and probably saved both his life and the aircraft. The additional confirmation seemed to tip the scales for Harrison. He looked at Sarah again, this time with what appeared to be genuine recognition of her abilities rather than skepticism about her presence. Captain Mitchell, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning. We need to have a more comprehensive discussion about your role in this program. Sarah saluted crisply. Yes, sir. As Admiral Harrison left the control room, the other personnel began to approach Sarah. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez was the first to speak. Phoenix, that was exceptional. You just proved something that needed proving. Others echoed similar sentiments, but Sarah remained focused on what tomorrow might bring. She had successfully challenged the Admiral's preconceptions in the most dramatic way possible, but she wasn't sure yet what the consequences would be. Military hierarchy was complex, and embarrassing a senior officer, even while saving lives, could have unpredictable results. Master Sergeant Williams approached with a smile. Captain, in 18 years of emergency response, I've never seen anything quite like that. You not only knew exactly what to do, but you had the courage to insist on being heard even when it was clear the Admiral didn't want to listen. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks, Sergeant. Captain Stevens deserved every chance we could give him. As the afternoon continued, and the base returned to normal operations, Sarah reflected on what had transpired. She had been grounded based on assumptions about her capabilities, only to prove those assumptions wrong in the most public way possible. Tomorrow's meeting with Admiral Harrison would likely determine whether this incident marked the beginning of new opportunities or the end of her career at Edwards Air Force Base. But one thing was certain. She had shown everyone present, including herself, that when it truly mattered, she was exactly the pilot she had always claimed to be. The call sign, Phoenix, had never felt more appropriate than it did today. Sarah arrived at Admiral Harrison's office 15 minutes early, as was her custom for important meetings. The morning California sun cast long shadows across the base, and the usual sounds of aircraft operations provided a familiar backdrop to what she knew would be a career-defining conversation. She had spent most of the previous evening reviewing her service record, preparing for questions about her qualifications and experience. The Admiral's office reflected his decades of service, with photographs from various assignments, commendations, and memorabilia from significant military operations. Behind his desk hung a large painting of an aircraft carrier with F.A. 18 seconds launching from its deck, a reminder of Harrison's naval aviation background. Sarah had researched his career thoroughly and knew that he was actually a highly decorated pilot himself, which made his dismissal of her abilities even more puzzling. "Captain Mitchell, please have a seat," Harrison said as she entered. His tone was formal, but lacked the cold dismissiveness of their previous encounters. On his desk was an open folder that Sarah recognized as her complete service record. "Sir," Sarah responded, taking the offered chair and maintaining her professional bearing despite the uncertainty about what was to come. Harrison studied her for a moment before speaking. "Captain, I spent most of last night reviewing your file. Complete file. Not just the summary I had looked at previously." He paused, and Sarah could see something that might have been embarrassment cross his features briefly. "Your record is exceptional. Top of your class in flight school. Distinguished graduate from the test pilot school. Multiple commendations for flying excellence. And yes, that emergency incident at Nellis, where you successfully handled a situation remarkably similar to what Captain Stevens faced yesterday." Sarah remained silent, knowing that Harrison was building towards something significant. "I owe you an apology, Captain. My decision to ground you yesterday was based on incomplete information and, frankly, preconceptions that have no place in professional military judgment." The admission surprised Sarah. Senior officers rarely acknowledged such errors, especially to junior personnel. Harrison's willingness to admit his mistake showed a character that she hadn't expected based on their previous interactions. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm more interested in moving forward than dwelling on yesterday's decisions." Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from an officer of your caliber. Which brings me to why I asked you here this morning." He turned his computer monitor toward her, displaying what appeared to be a mission briefing document classified at a high level. Sarah could see references to overseas operations and combat scenarios. "Captain, how familiar are you with Operation Desert Shield?" Sarah's pulse quickened. Desert Shield was a highly classified mission involving F-22 deployment to a forward operating base in the Middle East. Only the most experienced and trusted pilots were selected for such assignments. "I know it exists, sir, but I don't have access to operational details." That's about to change. Captain Stevens was scheduled to deploy as part of the next rotation to our forward base in 6 weeks. However, his aircraft emergency yesterday revealed some equipment problems that will require extended maintenance. More importantly, his medical evaluation showed minor injuries from the stress of yesterday's emergency that will keep him grounded for at least 2 months. Sarah began to understand where the conversation was heading, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. "We need a replacement pilot, someone with exceptional skills, proven judgment under pressure, and the ability to handle complex emergency situations. Based on yesterday's demonstration and a more thorough review of your qualifications, you're the best candidate for the assignment." The offer was everything Sarah had worked toward throughout her career. Combat deployment with the F-22 represented the pinnacle of military aviation, the ultimate test of a pilot's skills and training. But she also recognized the significance of Harrison's decision beyond just her personal advancement. "Admiral, are you sure about this assignment? Yesterday you had concerns about my readiness for standard training exercises." Harrison's expression grew serious. "Captain, yesterday I made a significant error in judgment that could have had tragic consequences. If you hadn't persisted in offering your assistance despite my dismissal, Captain Stevens might not have made it home. That incident taught me something important about the danger of assumptions and preconceptions." He stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line, where several F-22 seconds were visible in their maintenance hangars. "I've been in military aviation for 32 years, Captain. I've seen the field change dramatically during that time. Some changes I've embraced easily, others I've resisted. Yesterday forced me to confront the fact that my resistance to change has been based on outdated thinking rather than legitimate concerns about capability." Sarah appreciated his honesty, but she needed to understand his motivations completely before accepting such a significant assignment. "Sir, if I may ask directly, Are you offering me this assignment because you believe I'm the best pilot for the job, or because you feel obligated to make up for yesterday's error? The question hung in the air for several moments. Sarah knew it was a risk to be so direct with an admiral, but she needed to know that any opportunities came from merit rather than guilt. Harrison turned back to face her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw genuine respect in his expression. Captain Mitchell, if I were offering you this assignment out of guilt or obligation, I would be doing a disservice to you, to the mission, and to every other pilot under my command. Military operations don't allow for social experiments or gestures of goodwill. Lives depend on having the absolute best people in critical positions. He returned to his desk and pulled out another document. I've spent the morning consulting with other senior officers who have worked with you, including Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez and Major Patricia Chen from your previous assignment at Langley. Every single officer I spoke with confirmed what your record already shows. You are among the top 5 F-22 pilots in the entire program. Sarah felt a surge of pride at this recognition, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Furthermore, Harrison continued, yesterday, you demonstrated something that no amount of flight hours or training scores can measure. The moral courage to persist in doing what's right, even when facing personal consequences. That quality is essential for combat operations. The Admiral opened the classified briefing document fully. Operation Desert Shield involves providing air superiority and ground support in an active combat zone. The pilots selected for this mission will face real threats, make life and death decisions, and operate in conditions where there's no margin for error. I need pilots who can handle not just the technical challenges, but also the psychological pressure of combat operations. Sarah studied the mission details as Harrison explained the assignment. It was exactly the kind of challenging, high-stakes operation she had spent years preparing for. But it was also an opportunity that could have significant implications beyond her personal career. Admiral, I understand that my selection for this mission would make me the first woman to deploy with F-22 seconds in this theater of operations. Yes, it would. And I'm aware that my decision will be scrutinized both within the military and by outside observers. Some people will assume I'm making a political statement or responding to pressure for greater diversity in combat roles. Harrison's tone became more intense as he continued. But here's what I want to be absolutely clear about, Captain Mitchell. I don't give a damn about politics or outside pressure when it comes to combat operations. The only thing I care about is mission success and bringing all my pilots home alive. If I didn't believe you were fully capable of meeting both those objectives, you wouldn't be sitting in this office. The strength of his conviction was unmistakable. Sarah realized that Harrison's transformation over the past 24 hours represented something more significant than just changing his mind about one female pilot. He had confronted and overcome deep-seated biases that had shaped his thinking for decades. Sir, I accept the assignment. When do I deploy? 6 weeks from today. But your preparation starts immediately. You'll need additional briefings on the operational environment, specialized training for the specific mission requirements, and integration with the team you'll be joining. Harrison handed her a thick folder containing preliminary mission materials. Captain, I want to be absolutely clear about what you're accepting. This deployment will put you in harm's way. Enemy forces in the region have sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems and experienced pilots flying advanced aircraft. Every mission will involve real risk, and there's always the possibility that not everyone comes home. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the commitment she was making. I also want you to understand that your performance on this deployment will be watched carefully by many people. Some will be hoping you succeed, others will be waiting for any sign of failure. That's an unfair burden, but it's the reality of being first in any field. Sir, I've been carrying that burden throughout my entire career. Yesterday's incident was just another example of having to prove myself under circumstances where others might be given the benefit of the doubt. I'm prepared to handle whatever scrutiny comes with this assignment. Harrison smiled for the first time since Sarah had known him. I believe you are, Captain. Which brings me to one final matter. He opened another folder and pulled out a set of orders that had been prepared that morning. Effective immediately, you're promoted to major. The promotion was already in the pipeline based on your performance over the past 2 years. But I've expedited it, given your new assignment responsibilities. Sarah felt a rush of satisfaction at the promotion, which represented another significant milestone in her career progression. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Major Mitchell, I don't believe you could let anyone down. Yesterday you proved that under pressure, you have exactly the judgment and character we need in our combat pilots. As Sarah prepared to leave the Admiral's office, Harrison stood and extended his hand. Major, I want to apologize again for my initial assessment of your capabilities. You taught me a valuable lesson about the danger of assumptions and the importance of evaluating people based on their actual performance rather than preconceptions. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Admiral, everyone deserves the chance to learn and grow. What matters is that you recognized your error and were willing to correct it. Thanks for watching. And I'll not now the Waragram. That's generous of you to say. I hope that going forward, other officers can learn from my mistake without having to repeat it. As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she noticed that the hallway seemed different somehow. Word of yesterday's incident had spread throughout the base, and she could sense a subtle change in how other personnel looked at her. The mixture of curiosity and skepticism that had often accompanied her presence was being replaced by something that looked like respect. Major Patricia Chen was waiting in the hallway outside Harrison's office. Chen was one of the senior pilots on the base, and someone whose opinion Sarah valued highly. So, Phoenix, how did it go? Chen asked, with a knowing smile. Better than I expected. Much better. Much better. I heard Harrison spent half the night making phone calls about you. Apparently, he wanted to get input from every senior officer you've worked with. Sarah was surprised to learn about the extent of Harrison's research. It suggested that his decision had been based on thorough investigation rather than impulse. What did he find out? Chen's smile broadened. What we've all known for years. That you're one of the best pilots in the program. The difference is that now Admiral Harrison knows it too. As they walked down the hallway together, Chen continued. Word is already spreading that you're getting the Desert Shield assignment. People are talking, and from what I can tell, the reaction is overwhelmingly positive. You've got a lot of support around here, Phoenix. Sarah appreciated Chen's words, but she remained focused on the challenges ahead. The deployment would test every skill she had developed over years of training and flying. Success would open doors not just for her, but potentially for other women seeking similar opportunities. Failure could set back progress for years. Patricia, what's your honest assessment of what I'm walking into? Chen's expression became more serious. It's going to be challenging, no question. Combat operations are different from anything we do in training. The stress level is higher, the consequences are real, and you'll be operating in an environment where everything can change in seconds. She paused, considering her words carefully. But Phoenix, if anyone can handle it, you can. Yesterday's incident showed everyone that when things go wrong, you're exactly the kind of pilot they want in the cockpit. As they reached the main corridor, Sarah could see other pilots and personnel going about their daily duties. Some nodded respectfully as she passed. Others offered congratulations on her promotion. The atmosphere felt different from the day before, when she had been dismissed and grounded by Admiral Harrison. Chen, can I ask you something? Do you think yesterday's incident really changed Harrison's mind? Or was it just the catalyst for a change that was already happening? Chen considered the question thoughtfully. I think it was probably both. Harrison is a good officer, but he's also a product of his generation and experience. Sometimes people need a dramatic event to force them to confront their own biases. Yesterday gave him that event. They stopped at the door to the Flight Operations Center, where Sarah would begin her preparation for the upcoming deployment. The important thing, Chen continued, is that he was willing to change. A lot of people in his position would have doubled down on their original decision rather than admit they were wrong. The fact that he not only changed his mind but also gave you the most prestigious assignment available shows real character. Sarah appreciated Chen's perspective. The military was a hierarchical organization that didn't always encourage senior officers to admit mistakes or change course. Harrison's willingness to do both suggested that yesterday's incident had taught him something important about leadership, as well as about her capabilities. As Sarah entered the Flight Operations Center to begin her mission preparation, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been grounded and dismissed. Today, she was a newly promoted major, preparing for her first combat deployment. The transformation wasn't just in her circumstances, but also in how she was perceived by others. The call sign, Phoenix, had originally been chosen because of her ability to overcome setbacks and emerge stronger. Now it seemed prophetic in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her F-22, Phoenix Rising, would soon be taking her to a forward operating base where she would face the ultimate test of her skills and training. But more importantly, she would be carrying the hopes and expectations of everyone who believed that merit and capability should be the only factors determining who gets the opportunity to serve in combat roles. Admiral Harrison had given her more than just an assignment. He had given her the chance to prove that his change of heart had been justified. As Sarah began reviewing the classified mission materials, she was already planning how to ensure that both she and Harrison would be vindicated by the results. The Phoenix was indeed rising, and this time, everyone would be watching her fly.